On behalf of Harvard Law School Center on the Legal Profession, I'm excited to bring together David Wilkins and Wanji Walcott in conversation on the changing dynamics of leadership in the legal profession in a time of crisis. Professor Wilkins is the Lester Kissel Professor of Law, Vice Dean for Global Initiatives on the Legal Profession, and Faculty Director of the Center on the Legal Profession and the Center for Lawyers and the Professional Services Industry at Harvard Law School. But David is much more than that. He is the nation's preeminent scholar on the legal profession. Indeed, David was the first to engage in scholarly inquiry on the legal profession. He's also the leading global scholar on the impact of globalization on the legal profession in emerging economies with a focus on Brazil, India, and China. Over the span of his distinguished career, his life and work have impacted generations of lawyers and the theories of change that have shaped some of the most influential legal institutions around the world. Thank you, David. Wanji Walcott is Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, and General Counsel at Discover Financial Services, and a member of the company's executive committee. To put Wanji in context, she's part of a small percentage of Black general counsels in the Fortune 1000. Just 5.3% of the general counsel are Black. If we go further, just 2 Black women CEOs make up the Fortune 500. And of the 41 female CEOs, only 2 are Black. And that is where you belong, Wanji. Wanji has been recognized and lauded as one of the nation's leading diversity, equity, and inclusion experts, and a trusted advisor to some of the major global corporations. What makes this conversation an auspicious coming together is because Wanji's leadership stands as a testament to David's work on the in-house counsel revolution and the changing role of the general counsel. As far back as 2012, David, you wrote about the in-house counsel movement. Is the in-house counsel movement going global? You wrote there, individually and collectively, general counsels weigh in on some of the most pressing global challenges, from climate justice to human rights to corruption. You were prescient and prophetic because this conversation takes place in the aftermath of COP26. The elevated role of the General Counsel, you said, sees itself at the forefront of major public policy debates at the national and global level. And Wanji, you are part of the national dialogue on race. As a trusted advisor, vice counsel, and influential leader, you are the lawyer leader epitome. We are at the cusp of great change, brought on by the twin forces of the pandemic and the social justice movements, including the climate justice movement. And we are at the aftermath, as I said, of the COP26. It is a time of crisis, but also opportunity. And it is what David's colleague, Ben Heinemann, another giant general counsel, has called the Sisyphean task of leadership. So this moment in time calls for greater leadership to address structural challenges, especially greater diversity in the legal profession, but also greater accountability. The Center on the Legal Profession is the nation's premier institution at the intersection of research and practice. So my first question is to David. Can you speak a little bit about the center and its seminal work on the changing role of the Global General Counsel and the ways it intersects with Wanji's own growing arc of leadership? David?
Well, thank you, Rangita. I think this is proof positive that one should always get one's former students to introduce you, because they always give you far more glowing and generous introductions than you deserve. Rangita, it is an honor to be introduced by you because your own career is such a testament to leadership on these important issues, and you're bringing Wanji and I together here for this conversation is just one more example of the incredible things that you have have been doing to further understanding and dialogue on these important issues. It really is an honor to be here in conversation with Wanji. We were just talking actually before we got started. We've known each other for a long time. I first met her when she was at American Express, in which the then CEO of American Express, Ken Chenault, pulled me aside at a gathering and said, "You have to meet this woman. She's absolutely terrific. She's a future star." And everything that Wanji has done in her career since then just shows that, as always, Ken is incredibly prescient about these issues. It's particularly an honor for me in my role as the faculty director of the Center on the Legal Profession, because as Rangita says, we have been kind of studying the growing important role of general counsels, not just here in the United States, but around the world. And that role has only become more important given the confluence of events that we are living through, sort of not one, not two, but three crises melded together, obviously a global public health crisis, but an increasingly complex global economic situation, and increasingly global calls for social and racial justice. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that during the conversation. But general counsels sit at the intersection of all three of these trends, and at the intersection of what you might think of as law and business, right? Because they are distinguished lawyers who sit in business organizations, which are increasingly critical to how society responds to these kinds of challenges. At the Center of the Legal Profession, we try to approach these important issues kind of in three ways. We sort of call it three legs of the stool. First and foremost, we conduct world-class research, unbiased empirical research on these critical changes facing the profession. And we have been tracking the role of general counsels, first in the United States and increasingly around the world now for many years. And we are about to embark on a study. In fact, we actually have embarked on it with our partners, EY Legal, in which we are surveying thousands of general counsels around the world about the role of the legal department and the legal function more generally in issues of sustainability, social justice, and stakeholders for major corporations. So empirical research is the first tool. A leg of the stool. The second leg of the stool is trying to change the way in which we teach law students and lawyers about these critical issues. And so just yesterday, I finished my last class teaching with Ben Heineman, who you mentioned, a legendary general counsel. A course we've now been teaching for almost 10 years called Challenges of a General Counsel, Lawyers as Leaders, in which we try to introduce law students to the critical role that general counsels play, not just in the private sector, but in the public sector and the nonprofit sector as well. We also have launched over 10 years ago an executive education program called Leadership in Corporate Counsel, in which we've had now thousands of general counsels around the world come together at Harvard for 4 intensive days of really focus around their critical role. But the final leg of the stool, and the most important, is the one that really brings us together here with Wanji, which is building greater bridges and dialogue between the profession and the academy. For far too long, we've kind of moved almost in opposite directions, and we need each other, because if we're going to understand the critical roles and the changes in the profession, I need to talk to Wanji, and I need to hear from her firsthand what's going on the ground. And she deserves a legal academy that actually is focused on the challenges that she faces and helps to provide her with the tools that she needs to answer them. So I'm really thrilled to be here with Wanji, and I really look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, David. So building on the model of the lawyer leader paradigm that you and Ben Heinemann have advanced both in the academy as well as in the world of public affairs, you, Wanji, epitomize the role of a lawyer leader, especially in this growing space of diversity, inclusion, and equity. You are seen as the benchmark and the high watermark of what it is to be a general counsel who personifies those ideals and values. So we would like you to speak about your own journey to leadership at American Express, at PayPal, and at Discover. And what I would like you to do is to build on what David does in a way that no one else does at the center, where he is measuring the changes, the progress through this empirical work, which I call a global tracker. So we all come to David and to the Center on the Legal Profession to understand this theory of change. So we want you to look at the progress that has been made and how you continue to measure the progress, because what cannot be measured cannot be managed. Wanji?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me here with you today, Rangita, and also David. It's truly an honor to be sitting with both of you today. So just a little bit about my leadership journey and my background. As you mentioned, I've been in financial services for some time now, but I think I'm going to go back to my first job out of law school, which was at Lockheed Martin. So although I did work at a large law firm, that was my third job out of law school. So I had the good fortune of starting in the legal department at a Lockheed Martin subsidiary, where 2 years into my role there, my operating company general counsel said to me, probably within the context of a performance review, you're doing well. Here's some things you can work on. Here are some things that are strengths that you should continue to kind of exploit and grow. And he said, one day you could be general counsel. This was 2 years out of law school. And I said, my gosh, you think I could have your job? Really? Do you mean that? And he said, no. You could be general counsel of Lockheed Martin, not just an operating company. And I thought, no, that's crazy. But whether he believed it, was being honest with me, which I hope he was, he planted a seed in me. And it was really from that day that I thought, that's going to be my goal. But this is now in, just for context, this would have been in about 1996 or so, when Rangita, you alluded to kind of the really kind of stark void of kind of Black leadership at the Fortune 500 level, particularly in our industry. And so back then I had no roadmap. I mean, so this is, I couldn't go to Google and say, Google, help me figure out how to become a general counsel. I didn't know any general counsel besides my operating company general counsel and the general counsel of the broader organization that I worked for. But I set my sights on that. And I just decided I am going to continue to add tools to my toolbox that will hopefully get me there. And I decided no matter what, I wasn't going to be deterred. So fast forward, I ended up a couple jobs later going to a big law firm, which was a great experience. I think it was a very skills building experience. And I think what that did is it made me ready for my role at American Express, and that I had both a combination of in-house legal experience. And so I knew how to navigate in an in-house environment, how to serve internal business partners, how to collaborate with them. But I also honed my skills at a large law firm where I was, now kind of operating and practicing at a higher level than I was, I think, prior to that experience. And so, David, your comments about Ken Chenault reminded me of like the great times at American Express. And I will say, I had an epiphany at American Express on a couple of different levels while I was there pretty early in my career. One was that if I was going to be a leader of any kind of impact and caliber, I needed to be very deliberate about my leadership. And coming from a law firm, going straight to American Express, there wasn't a huge emphasis on leadership at the law firm where I worked. It was more around supporting clients, utilizing kind of people around you, beneath you to support said clients. But I didn't have really a huge plan or interest in how I can engage and develop those beneath me, those around me. And so it was more of a kind of individual contributor mindset, like I had my own clients, how am I going to get this work done? Who's going to do it? Who's good enough to do it? Okay, that person was productive and successful. I'll use them in the future. That person was not. I will not give them feedback. I will really just kind of keep moving forward. Fast forward, get to American Express. Ken makes it very, very clear to all of us that leadership is paramount to our success as an organization, our collective success, our individual success. And so light bulb went off and I thought, Wanji, leadership's important here. It's now important to you. You got to, kind of succeed in this realm. Now, I had the good fortune of it. I've had a lot of good fortune throughout my life, but I had the good fortune at American Express to be selected for this new leadership program that we were launching, not as a participant, but as an instructor, which was fascinating because I didn't at that point identify myself as sort of, one of our strong leaders or even a leader with potential. But I think we've always heard the adage, if you want to learn something, teach something. And so I had this wonderful opportunity in this program to partner with senior leaders in HR and kind of travel around the country teaching these leadership modules. And I think one of the most fun experiences I had with doing that is there was a group in New York that was going to be surprised to learn once the program kicked off that I was actually not going to be the co-instructor. Ken was going to be the co-instructor. So I started my routine as I usually do with my HR partner that I was paired with. And then, I said, we have kind of important news to share. And then Ken walks in the door and it's great. But I say all that to say that there was a very deliberate focus on leadership. And I began to think about my role as a lawyer much more broadly than I had before, realizing that leadership was going to be kind of the key to really having a high impact as a trusted advisor. Rangita, going to your point around, kind of how do we measure our progress and the need to measure our progress, I actually think about that comment in the context of kind of my current responsibilities, which include having responsibility for our ESG framework and program, where we are looking to shift our traditional kind of corporate social responsibility or CSR reporting to more kind of ESG focused reporting. And I think the big difference there, as I think about it, which was triggered by your comments, Rangita, is, moving from making our business accountable for kind of what it's doing in corporate social responsibility to making our efforts measurable and quantifiable. And so I think about that in the context of kind of all of the pillars of ESG, certainly social. And so, it's great because in this moment that we've been in the past couple of years, I think we've seen a lot of legal leaders come together with good intentions and draft and sign letters of support. But I've not been a huge fan of the letter signing process, and I have not signed really, I think, many, if any, letters, only because, not because I didn't believe in the spirit behind them, but I didn't really think that was going to sort of be impactful and make a difference. And so I think that we have a great opportunity to seize here to move beyond kind of platitudes and saying the right thing to actually doing the right thing and measuring our progress in a meaningful way. And so I think that the exciting kind of opportunity we have as legal leaders is to be at the center of that, right? I think unlike, and I'm biased, but unlike any other role that I see in my C-suite, I have such an opportunity to influence across my broader organization as a trusted advisor, thinking very broadly about my role and the impact that I can have going forward. So again, it's a privilege to be here with both of you today, but it's also a privilege to sit in the seat that I sit in, where we have such a great view across the organization. And I think of myself as someone who can not only impact our broader industry, but certainly my broader company. And I've been fortunate to be given the opportunity to have that kind of impact.
So my question to David builds on Wanji's commitment to ESG, as well as Wanji's skepticism of the letter writing, the pledges that we have seen an explosion of pledges in the last year. And a year later, we're trying to measure the reality, what has been realized and actualized in terms of the promises that have been made. But David, one of your great strengths is that you champion many of your distinguished graduates and alumni and your dear students. Kim Rivera at HP was one of your students, and one of the calls to actions that she issued in 2017, the diversity holdback, was a letter to HP's outside law firms informing them that the company might withhold up to 10% of invoiced fees for failure to meet its diversity standards. And this is something that we all applauded, you especially, and you championed her. So I want you to speak a little bit to that, but also to Wanji's commitment and dedication to ESG. Now, you've taken the ESG model and you've unpacked it to examine it through the lenses of the 3 S's: sustainability, stakeholders, and social justice. These 3 pillars that are so important to the future of business and the legal profession. And sustainability is also part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The stakeholder is part of, moving away, a shift from Milton Friedman's understanding of shareholder capitalism to a broader stakeholder capitalism, and social justice, which is what we are a witness to in the last year, that the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement hold us accountable to a great public reckoning. So David, can you speak to those 2 issues?
So it's such a privilege to be speaking to this, particularly to Wanji, because I think she set it up so perfectly. This is a real moment, following the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and now with the Ahmaud Arbery verdict, the world's attention is focused on social justice, but it's also a moment around stakeholders and sustainability, starting with BlackRock issuing the letter back in 2018, or the change of the Business Roundtable about the definition of a corporation, or the statements in Davos about a need for a great reset of capitalism, to quote Harvard Business School and University professor Rebecca Henderson, as she says, we need this in a world on fire. And the world is literally on fire if we look out at what's happening in California. So this is a moment, but it is a moment that demands results and accountability. Otherwise, we know that not only will the moment dissipate, but there's a backlash already brewing. We can see it already. I mean, if you look at not to be political, but if you look at the way the election in Virginia went and the kinds of things that are being mobilized in the politics of today, there is no question that there's a backlash brewing. And the thing that will feed that backlash even more is if there's a failure to demonstrate results. And I'm sure Wanji is aware that the Washington Post did a very interesting study in August, in which they looked at the $50 billion that have been pledged to racial and social justice initiatives, an incredible amount of money since the death of George Floyd. But then they tried to go back and track, well, how much of that money's actually been spent? What's it been spent for? How much of it has been spent on things other than things that are in the normal course of the company's business anyway, the old thing of giving discounts to buy more of our products. It makes a difference that in almost every commercial there's an interracial couple, but how much of that is translating into the real opportunities for people inside the company or the people the company share. So this is a critical set of issues. One thing, as I mentioned, that we're trying to do, which I hope will be helpful to Wanji, is we're trying to get a sense of what role the legal function broadly construed. And Wanji talked about the broad definition of being a general counsel. It's way more than just doing the legal work for the organization, although of course that's critically important. But general counsels are really one of the few people who can look across the entire organization and also outside the organization to all the relevant constituents, because those things all end up on the general counsel's desk. And so what we are trying to do is to understand the ways in which general counsels are trying to, what I would call, operationalize their focus on these three S's: sustainability, stakeholders, social justice, in a way that is measurable and accountable. And you mentioned Kim Rivera, who I'm very proud of. I've actually, as I told Wanji, after this event, I'm doing an event for the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity, where Kim is the chair. And the thing about Kim's is it had a metric, right? It had metrics involved, and it had metrics of accountability. And we really need to think creatively about what those metrics of accountability are. Because as you said, what gets measured gets done, and what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. And the world is looking around all of these dimensions. I'll just kind of mention one more thing. I teach another course called The Legal Profession, in which we try to look at all of these issues. And we did a class on sustainability and social justice. And you won't be surprised that my students are deeply skeptical about whether these pledges and statements and commitments are going to result in real action. And my students are the ones everyone in the world wants to recruit for a legal department. And that's not just true for my students, it's true for all talent, right? Horacio Gutierrez said in a webinar that we did that when people ask him why he's so intent on trying to really produce results, is it for the consumers or is it for the public in general or regulators? He said, no, my most important constituents is my employees. Because if I am not credible around these issues, I'm not going to be able to attract and, more importantly, retain top talent. And my business depends on top talent. And I think that's true for all the businesses that are there listening. So I hope that the work that we'll do, Wanji, will be helpful to you as you think through this. And I hope we can engage you in getting your insight and thoughts about how we can really make meaningful this moment we're in.
So as you both pointed out, that skepticism is healthy. It drives accountability. And we have to move beyond rhetoric to realize those promises. And in the summer of 2020, the test of corporate purpose was a report that was sponsored by the Ford Foundation. And just like the Washington Post, it revealed some of the gaps and the lacuna in the pledges that were made. And the final conclusion was that since the pandemic's inception, the study concluded the Business Roundtable statement has failed to deliver fundamental shifts in corporate purpose in a moment of grave crisis when enlightened purpose should be paramount. So it's that enlightened purpose that we need to aspire to. So on that note of enlightened purpose, Wanji, what do you think holds for us in the legal profession in the next 18 months? How do we move forward from this moment to a moment that addresses enlightened purpose and moves us beyond rhetoric to structural change?
Yeah, a great question. So maybe I will, in response to that, kind of share something that we have recently done at Discover that I'm very, very proud of. And so at Discover, our mission is to ensure a brighter financial future for all. It was our mission prior to the pandemic. It certainly remains our mission. And as the pandemic ensued, as kind of racial injustice and the anti-racism movement kind of was at the forefront, we began thinking about, as an organization, David, to your point around stakeholders, kind of what we could do that we could quantify that would really have an impact. And we thought of that both in the context of internal impact for our employees, as well as external impact, not just for our shareholders, but for the communities in which we live and work. And so one of the things we made a decision on last year was that we were going to open a call center on the south side of Chicago. And, it's interesting, if you think about the decision to do that, it's, we're in a pandemic, people have gone to work from home, and we are now saying, we are going to open a call center, and again, going back a year, in an uncertain kind of economic environment, where if you think about our business is banking and we issue credit cards. A year ago, it was uncertain kind of what the economy was going to do. I think we were probably maybe one stimulus payment or cycle in, but it was just unsure what the future held. But we made this commitment, along the lines of, really kind of not just talking, but actually doing something that's going to have a broad and sustainable impact. So fast forward, we opened a call center on the south side of Chicago in what was once a Target store that had been abandoned. And we took that on, built out that space. We made a commitment that we were going to hire 1,000 leaders from the local community to work and to lead that call center. And we are probably around 150 or so days in, but it has been an overwhelming success so far. And so we have hired team leaders from the local community. I have gone out there a couple of times because what's interesting, it is the south side of Chicago. So there are a large number of Black and brown people are working there. And when I go there and visit, it is amazing to me because people tell me stories about how they used to have to commute, an hour outside or an hour plus outside of the south side of Chicago, which then I think for all of us, think about, the time it takes away from your family, your child rearing, just the energy it takes to spend 3 hours a day commuting. And now people are proud to work in their own neighborhood and to bring people in. And it's great for me because it's been an opportunity, as you mentioned, David, as lawyers, we have an opportunity to have a hand in everything, which is great. And for someone like me, I love that. And so from that decision to open this call center, it really sparked our diverse supplier program because we decided not only are we going to create 1,000 jobs on the south side of Chicago that are not just contained to a call center, right? So we're a large company, and the thought is that you enter our organization and there are opportunities for you to grow your career and advance through the organization. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But again, we also thought it was a great opportunity to really fuel our supplier diversity focus and to make sure that the people that we are engaging to design the space, build the space, provide all the services you need in a facility are also from the south side of Chicago. So we've seen a lot of success there, which is great as well. And I think it is there's a huge sense of pride that we all have that we've been able to do that. And we know it's something that will continue to be our legacy. So, during a time of, everybody's going home, hunkering down, now's not the time to be growing. It's the time to be kind of trying to hold your ground. We decided that, no, this is an absolute great time to be growing. And I think one of the other great things about this opportunity that we've, been able to provide and take advantage of is that my team, we have a very vibrant pro bono program. And we are also finding opportunities to provide pro bono services on the south side of Chicago, which we were doing before, but in a more integrated fashion. So I just think there's going to be a lot of tangible, measurable impact that we're already seeing based on this kind of bold decision that we had to open our call center on the south side of Chicago during a pandemic.
So Wanji, on that note, I want to bring this discussion to a conclusion. But because there's a discussion between Wilkins and Walcott, two giants in the law, and because I watched the way in which David, right from the inception, championed you and your voice, Wanji, I want to resort to the voices of two giants in public life whose legacy you burnish. And this is a note that was written by the great Frederick Douglass to the great I.W. Wells in 1892, admiring a paper that she wrote. And these are the words that I want to leave us with, because these are the words that I know David thinks of you, Wanji, when the great Frederick Douglass wrote to Ida B. Wells, "Brave woman, you have done your people and mine a service which can neither be weighed nor measured." So in a conversation where we talked about the primacy of measurement and measuring results, there are some intangibles that cannot be measured. And that is the intangible of friendships, relationships, and building bridges between the academia and the private sector that you lead, Wanji. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, I should have known after 18 months to turn my mic back on, but I was so overwhelmed by that wonderful statement from Frederick Douglass, which is so appropriate to Wanji. And as a proud son of the South Side of Chicago, Wanji, you may have noticed that is the city of Chicago flag hanging over my left shoulder. It is such an important thing that you're doing, and such a wonderful example of what can be done with a certain intentionality and purpose. And it reminds me of speaking of Ken Chenault, but also Ken Frazier, their 110 initiative to provide 1 million jobs for Black youth in the next 10 years. This is a perfect example of what can be done. And Rangita, I think this is really a moment in which we both need to celebrate those like Wanji who have put themselves out there on the line to actually accomplish real results, but also promise to support them in any way that we can by providing the kind of research and support that is necessary to make these initiatives helpful. And so that's my pledge to you, Wanji, and I look forward to continuing this conversation for a long time to come.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, David. And thank you, Rangita, for hosting us today in this discussion. And David, thank you for the work that you're doing. It is so important. And I look forward to partnering with you more in the future. I think, we've accomplished a lot collectively, but there's so much more to do. And so I'm certainly committed to doing my part to ensure that we continue to have the impact that we need to have and create equitable spaces for all of us.
Thank you, Wanji.